Hello, my name's Jack, and welcome to another MTG Arena video. I'm so glad that you've joined us today. Many of you have been wondering where I've been over the last few weeks, and the short answer is that my wife and I had a baby. We have a newborn baby girl named Kerrigan Grace, and she's amazing and healthy, and everything's going great. And then we also moved into a new apartment, so now that we have some sense of stability and consistency in our day-to-day lives, I'm returning back to YouTube and Twitch to create more content for you guys, so be on the lookout for that. Subscribe if you haven't already, follow me on Twitch, and you'll see a whole lot more coming down the pipeline. Today's video is an excerpt from one of my recent Twitch streams. I had a viewer from YouTube hop over onto the live stream and ask a bunch of questions. And basically, he wanted to know what was the thought process behind building my blue-black God-Pharaoh's gift deck. And so that's what today's video is. Enjoy. There we go. So this is the card we're trying to play with. God-Pharaoh's gift. It says at the beginning of combat on your turn, you may exile a creature card from your graveyard. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that card, except it's a 4/4 black zombie. It gains haste until end of turn. So that's like the ultimate goal of this deck, is to try and play with that card. Now, obviously, this is 7 mana, so we don't want to run 4 copies. 2 is probably a little more reasonable, just because you don't want 4 7-mana cards just lingering around in your hand. Gate to the Afterlife is a nice little accompanying card to help the deck get along. Basically, it's a way to dig deeper into your deck with looting effects. It just says whenever non-token creature you control dies, you gain 1 life. Then you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. Then you can, if you have 6 or more creatures in your graveyard, you get the second ability, which is pay 2, tap, and sacrifice it. Search your graveyard, hand, or library for a card named God-Pharaoh's Gift, and put it onto the battlefield. If you search your library in this way, shuffle it. So we're basically trying to build a deck that runs around these 2 cards. So the ideal deck is going to want a lot of creatures. So you want to be able to have ways of getting creatures into the graveyard. Gate to the Afterlife is an enabler in that sense. But then you also want creatures with enter the battlefield effects. And you're going to want that for 2 reasons. One, if you're just playing a bunch of creatures and they don't do anything when they hit the field, you're going to have a hard time controlling what your opponent is doing. And then on top of that, you kind of get to use their enter the battlefield effects twice with God-Pharaoh's Gift, right? So once you stick a God-Pharaoh's Gift on the field, any creatures in the yard you can bring back and make, another use of. And so that's how that deck ideally wants to run. So cards that would help with it, obviously, you're going to want your enter the battlefield effects that are going to help you stabilize the board, stay in the game. So the pinnacle card for that is Ravenous Chupacabra. Definitely want to run 4 of that. This card is unbelievably good. It kills something and is a 2/2. It's a creature for the purposes of Gate to the Afterlife. Doesn't get much better for our deck. And ultimately, Ravenous Chupacabra is just good in any deck. It's just that good of a card. One of the other things that's notable is with God-Pharaoh's Gift, the token that it creates is a black zombie. Zombie's relevant because Scarab God cares about zombies. And Scarab God is a nice little 5-drop that can do a lot of work. And when you're playing against decks that have Ixalan's bindings, 1 Ixalan's binding against a God-Pharaoh's Gift, if you don't have other ways to win the game, you feel kind of locked out. So Scarab God is at the same time a powerful card and a bit of a hedge against the risk of people locking you out of the game with an Ixalan's binding. So now we just want to add a whole bunch of creatures. So one of the things you always want to be mindful of, Kenan, I know you were asking about when you're building a deck, things to be mindful of. So one of the things you want to look at here is our curve. So right now, you'll see our mana curve. We have this many 1-drops, 0 2-drops. Looks like 4 or so 3s, 4 4s, 2 5s, 2 6 pluses. So you want to make sure this curve does not look like this, where it's heavily weighted on the right side. So we need a lot of 2-drops to balance out the deck. And so some great 2-drops to play that we want, well, we want 2-drops that are going to be able to get us deeper into our deck and potentially count as creatures. And so fortunately, black has a lot of access to that. So we have the Zealot. It's a 1/1 that draws us a card deeper into the deck. Counts as a creature when it's in the grave. Counts as a creature for the purposes of the Gate to the Afterlife loot trigger. That's the draw card, discard a card. So that's perfect. We have the, what is it, with the Explore trigger? Secret Squire. That's another awesome 2-drop to run. And then, one of the other cards that's really awesome for enabling your Gate to the Afterlife and God-Pharaoh's Gift is Champion of Wits. So definitely want to run 4 of those. If you're going to play God-Pharaoh's Gift, I would say the minimum amount of cards you want, like, you can kind of, like, I already have a list that's pretty much the ideal list that I want right now for the most part. But if you want to build God-Pharaoh's Gift, you're going to want at least 1 rare wild card for a God-Pharaoh's Gift, 4 uncommons for a Gates. I mean, you could get away with 3, but I probably want 4. And then you're going to want as many Champion of Wits as possible. I would get 4 Champion of Wits before I would get the second God-Pharaoh's Gift. That's personal preference, simply because I would just rather have a little more consistency in getting the first God-Pharaoh's Gift on the field than, you know, not being able to get any on the field but having 2 in the deck. But again, personal preference there. One of the things that's nice about this deck is there's a lot of commons and uncommons in it, so it's not too unreasonable to build with strictly wild cards. Let's see, we're at 24 cards here. We want to add 12 more. So you see our curve is looking a little better now. So cards that help us, we wanted more creatures. So that could be, we said Striped Riverwinder was a good one. This is kind of acting like a 4 copies of Opt, except it's a creature when it's in the graveyard, which is what we care about. It's a bad Opt, but it's still, again, gets us deeper into the deck. And that's kind of the theme of this deck, is just play a bunch of creatures that help us get deeper into our deck to find our big impact cards, which are, again, Gates, God-Pharaoh's Gift, and Scarab God. Ravenous Chupacabra, in a sense, is a big impact card because it helps us deal with what our opponent's doing. But the game-ending cards are Scarab God and God-Pharaoh's Gift. So we're at 28. We want roughly 36 cards because we won't leave 24 lands for this. So we need 8 more. Maybe a copy of Vizier of Many Faces. Lets us copy something that's important. It's against decks that have Scarab God. You can actually play Vizier as kind of like a... it's not necessarily a counter to Scarab God, but at least when you copy their Scarab God with Vizier, or any god for that matter, you get the effect when it goes into the yard. When it goes into the graveyard, you get the return effect, so it actually comes back to your hand. Even though in the graveyard it counts as Vizier, it still gets that effect. So it'll bounce back. We can run Chart of Courses. I have 3 copies of those. I don't know if I'd run 4, but I would at least run 3. The benefit of Chart of Course, again, draw cards. You're going to have a lot of little guys that you can sometimes attack with, so you can not necessarily have to discard. But then sometimes you actually do want to discard something in your hand. So you can just discard with the Chart of Course. Like, for example, if you have, I think 2 games ago, was it? I had a God-Pharaoh's Gift and a Chart of Course in the opening hand. And that kind of worked out, well, it was against red deck win, so we lost. But against any other deck, that would have worked out really well. Because you could just discard the God-Pharaoh's Gift, kind of get it out of your hand. Let's see. So that's, we want 4 more cards. I think we had some Vraska's Contempts. Vraska's Contempt is basically just, because there's so many Scarab Gods floating around, we want to run Vraska's Contempt. I'm running 2 right now, so that kind of helps deal with the Scarab Gods or anything else that keeps recurring back and forth. Vraska's Contempt can also be really good against opposing Champion of Wits. because they're not going to be able to eternalize it. And it also helps a little bit against red deck wins because of the incremental life gain. Sometimes it's enough to just squeeze you out a win. But like I said, red deck wins is probably the worst matchup for this deck. So that's 34. I'm trying to think of what we had. Oh, I know what it was. We were running Dire Fleet. Dire Fleet Poisoner. So this kind of acts as a creature type kill spell because you're going to flash it in and block with something. It doesn't always work out the best, particularly with the number of magma sprays that are floating around. So I was just running 2 of those for now. It kind of helps our curve look a little more smooth. As you can see, you've got a situation here where it kind of smoothly goes down. It's not perfect. Doesn't have to be perfect. But the point of the matter is you want plenty of 2-drops so you have plenty of things to do in the beginning. Plenty of 2 and 3-drops, excuse me. Now we have to add the lands. We want to make sure that we have enough sources of mana for each thing. And honestly, I actually have a little bit of a cheat sheet that I use for figuring out my land base. So let me see if I can share the link with you guys, because it's really easy. This article by Frank Karsten is probably the most helpful article that a new player can read. Super, super helpful. Fortunately for this deck, it's not too strict. It's not too hard to build around. The most mana intensive thing that we have going on is double black on turn 4 and double blue on turn 4. But usually we're not even going to be trying to cast Vizier on turn 4. Vizier often turns into like a turn 5 play, although there's a few niche cases where it is a turn 4 play, because you're trying to copy something, and usually you don't really have anything meaningful to copy until turn 4. Turn 5 when there's like a Ravenous Chupacabra or something on the field. But again, if the opponent played first, they play their 4-drop, you want to copy their 4-drop. You can obviously do that. So double black is the thing we care most about, because we got 6 cards that are double black on turn 4. So if you open that link with me and you go down, you should see a whole bunch of math. And if you go down to the heading that says the numbers. Okay, so now on to the results. He has a little Excel spreadsheet there of everything you'd want for each type of deck. So 40-card deck if you're playing draft, 60-card deck if you're playing constructed, like standard constructed, and 99 cards for you Commander fans. And so by turn 4, we want to be able to guarantee double blue, or not guarantee, but have a high probability of double blue or double black. So that means we need 18 sources. We don't have 18 sources right now, and I'll show you why, but we'll get as close as we can to 18. We know we want Evolving Wilds. 1, because it kind of thins out the deck for us, and 2, it acts as a blue or a black source effectively, because it can search an island or a swamp. So there's 4 of each right now. Again, we're running 24 lands. So let's get our islands. So we're going to take that one. And then for swamps, we'll take that one. And we know we want an Ipnu Rivulet, or however many we have of those, because it kind of gives us an option to mill creatures into the graveyard. We can mill ourselves and get extra creatures in the graveyard if we need in a pinch. I haven't had many cases where I needed to use this, but it's just a nice little thing to have in addition. Ipnu Rivulet, for all intents and purposes, counts as a blue source. For the most part, we're going to want an even base, maybe a little more swamps than islands. So that's 24 right there. Let's see if the mana sources are right, though. So if we're doing this here, we've got 15 black sources and 13 blue. The other thing that's notable is sometimes we want to be able to cast Riverwinder on turn 1 for the cycle cost. According to the article, the spreadsheet says we need 14 blue sources to cast it with 90% probability. Yeah, 14, we have 13. Evolving Wilds is an enter the battlefield tapped ability, so that doesn't really help us too much. So there's just going to be times where Riverwinder just sits in our hand for turn 1. But there we go. So that's our land base. It's probably an identical deck to what I had, or if not, very close. But yeah, 11 swamp, 8 island. That gets us a 15-13 spread. And so that's what I was doing there to try and... Basically, the whole purpose of that is just to maximize being able to play our spells as consistently as possible. But yeah, any questions? Cannon, did you have any questions or thoughts on that? I know you had asked a lot about that on the YouTube comments, so I just want to make sure. Oh yeah, the article is right above, but I'll link it again for you, just in case it, I don't know if chat messed up or something. There you go. That's the Channel Fireball article I was referencing. And when I clip this and put it into a YouTube video, I'll make sure that that's linked at the bottom too. Why no multicolor lands? Oh, that's a really, really good question. So we talked about how we ideally wanted 18 black sources and we wanted 1 or 2 more blue sources. So obviously if we ran like sunken or submerged boneyard, then we would be able to get a little closer and have the consistency there and the number of mana sources, right? But here's the important thing to know. In this meta right now, it's a very aggressive meta. A lot of aggro decks there going around. This deck, for 2 reasons. 1, because it just wants to play its early things consistently and on curve. And 2, to be able to go toe-to-toe with those aggro decks, you have to be able to cast your spells, right? And so if we go from 4 Evolving Wilds to 4 Evolving Wilds in 4 Submerged Boneyard, that's going to be 8 enter the battlefield tapped lands, essentially putting us behind a turn on our curve, right? So, you know, you can obviously mitigate some of that by playing a enter the battlefield tapped land on turn 1, so you just get that out of the way, right? But if you have another one and you have to play an enter the battlefield tapped land on turn 3, now you're going 2-drop, 2-drop, 4-drop instead of 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop. You want to be able to curve out. You want to be able to play, if the opportunity presents itself, a Gate to the Afterlife on 3 if the blue-black control deck you're against is tapped out for a turn. And so that's why we don't have 8 enter the battlefield tap lands. Now, once I get some Drowned Catacomb, that will certainly help. Yeah, I don't own any right now. I would be fine with running Drowned Catacombs. Submerged Boneyard in this deck, not so much. And that's all for today's video. If you enjoy what I do on this channel, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, you can find me on Twitch and Twitter, so if you venture over onto that side of the internet, be sure to follow me on those platforms. And have a great weekend. Peace.